This is Self-Care-ish, a podcast where we talk about divorce, dating, choosing not to date, and saying yes to the things you've been scared to indulge in and no in a way that won't get you ostracized by society. The goal for this series is to defy some of the social stigmas and hurdles people face when they make a bold decision, whether it's to leave a relationship, quit a job, or even being brave enough to tell friends and family no when you're at capacity and you need time for you. And who am I? I'm Megan Lonergan. I've been a columnist and copywriter for over a decade, and I'm also a newly separated co-parent. And if there's one thing I love more than anything, it's meeting people where they're at. And where you're at is probably busy, most likely multitasking while you're listening to this. So with no further ado, it's time to get self-care-ish. Hey you! I had a crazy week last week and I have a little sniffle and you can hear it in my voice. Last week was definitely off kilter, and usually when that happens, it's a sign from the universe that I either need to get a big fat glass of wine, or go on a solid vacation. And if you're the same, I got your back. And that is why I've partnered with Plum Guide. Plum Guide is kind of like the home rental website other home rental websites want to be when they grow up. It's not just any old property on there. It is a very curated selection of homes that have been vetted. If only all our dates were curated into a nice list of premium options, I tell you what. So if holidaying in a chateau near the Pantheon in Paris, or in a modern designer loft by the La Sagrada Familia in Barcelona tickles your giblets, and honestly, I just checked the prices, it's actually not that expensive, then Plum Guide is what you want. And if you tap the link in the show notes, you can check them out for your next stay and you support Self-Care-ish. So win-win. And if you prefer to stay closer to home, Naked Wines are giving you, my esteemed Self-Care-ish listener, $100 towards your first wine delivery. No strings attached. Just tap the link in the show notes and redeem. Okay, this episode is just for guys or people who don't get their period. If you're not a man or you do get your period, then block your ears because this episode is not for you. I'm BSing, of course. It is important to me that as many people listen to this episode as possible. So I will probably spam social media after this. But I've actually timed this episode pretty perfectly because I'll be honest, last week's ep, I was deflecting. I was being shallow. It was cute and it was fun, but it wasn't real. And I know that's the stuff that really resonates with you guys. I can see it in the numbers, like the real stuff, the sharing, the rawness. Sometimes it gets daunting. And I think I just wanted to be like, you know what? Everything's fine, and gloss over it and pretend everything's normal. Do you ever do that? You have a lot to say, or there is a lot going on in your life. But whenever someone asks, how are you? You just answer, yeah, I'm good, or I'm fine, or I'm great. When in reality, the whole house of cards you've built up for yourself is really just toppling. But that's kind of what having PMDD is like 2 weeks out of the month. But wait. Let's backtrack. What is PMDD? Well, it stands for premenstrual dysphoric disorder. No, wait, before I lose you, because Lord knows as a society, I know we love to pretend that menstruating is just as easy as sneezing out of our vagina once a month. The reason I'm talking about this is because it relates to you. Seriously, I'm looking at the men here and the people who don't menstruate as well, but also the women or anyone, whatever gender you see yourself, because 1 out of 20 people have this condition, which means, yes, that woman you honked your horn at angrily just before, she probably has it. Your coworker who seems a little off in your Zoom call, they probably have it. That annoying client who is really terrible at giving feedback most likely has it. Your kid's teacher who seems a little short today probably has it. And about 20 kids to deal with on top of that. But what I'm saying is we brush with it every day. And often we forget that we are all collectively trying to handle our internal issues on a layer cake of external stresses that are just part and parcel of living in today's fucked up world. And because PMDD has only recently been added to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which sounds so heavy, many people don't even know they have it. So they're just out there. They're just out there raw dogging life, feeling like shit and wanting to die 2 weeks before their period. And I am not being hyperbolic when I say that. The wanting to die bit isn't like, oh, this hurts, I want to die, which can also happen. But PMDD is interesting because it's so much more existential than just physical pain, which you can sort of point at. To get personal for a second, I have been in therapist's office telling them, like, it's not that I don't want to live. It's just that I think I should evaporate. And that doesn't even cover the half of how it can feel or how it can impact their partners' lives. Don't worry, I'm also on your side, guys. If you don't have periods, it's a foreign world, so buckle up. I really empathize. Now, I wish I could play copyrighted stuff on the pod because for me, I know when PMDD is coming on because that song, Funny Feeling by Bo Burnham, just hits so differently. And if you want to know what is going on in the brain of your PMDDing wife, girlfriend, or partner, just listen to that song and I will link it in the show notes. It's so accurate. But the following analogy is the only thing I can liken it to so the men really understand this. Okay, and first, before I go on further, this is important. You just got to know this. A woman's cycle exists in 2 phases. For 2 weeks after our period, we are in follicular. And the 2 weeks before we bleed, we are in luteal phase. I know. Stay with me here. Although, to be honest, you tapped on a podcast about PMDD, so this is what we're talking about. Now, guys, imagine you're at the greatest rave of your life. It's a warehouse full of everyone you love, and there's a giant neon sign on the wall with follicular phase written in pink 80s cyberpunk font. Because it's a fucking party, you pop a tab of ecstasy, right? And you do it all the time, so you know what to expect. And then you feel the come up. You're social, you're laughing, you're connecting with people, you feel hot, you feel sexy, charismatic, your dance moves are on point, you love the room loves you back, everything flows. And you say to someone, I wish we could feel like this all the time, man. Like, because when you're on ecstasy or when you're in your follicular phase, you truly do. And what's important to remember here is when this is going on, you feel like this is the real you. That is the first 2 weeks after your period. And it's probably when you met your wife, girlfriend, or partner because she was out socializing and she felt magnetic and she was drawing people in with her beautiful, magnetic, gorgeous, follicular energy. But as is natural with warehouse parties and ecstasy and PMDD, eventually you get the creeping feeling of the high falling off. You notice it's 4 a.m. The birds are chirping outside, and someone whips you away to their boyfriend's house for kick-ons. And you go because you desperately want to keep the high going because you have stuff you want to do and you have the memories of the joy of connecting with people to cling to, and you want to hold on to them. But halfway there in the car, the come down hits, the luteal phase. Suddenly, it dawns on you that you don't actually know any of these people, like really. Like, do they know your last name, what you do for a living? Would they care if you never spoke to them again? Or are they pretending to like you? If they actually knew who you were deep down inside, would they even really like you? Do they think you look hideous because you have flaws and you're not funny all the time? Sometimes you're a total goblin in a hoodie watching Community for the 100th time just to take your mind off the ruminating thoughts in your head. You just question all your life choices. You feel drained, empty, and you desperately want to run away from the world. Sidebar comment, thinking about this, I think Sylvia Plath probably had PMDD and nobody diagnosed her. Think of all the people who've suffered not knowing. Anyway, that is the luteal phase, when the body is preparing for the implantation of a fertilized egg and progesterone starts to increase, aka the world's worst kick-on party. And around this moment, I can hear your brain thinking, Megan, this sounds very suspiciously like bipolar. To which I would say, yes. And that is why so many women get misdiagnosed as bipolar. And I'm not being anti-bipolar here. If you are, amazing. You are probably mega fucking creative. But misdiagnosing PMDD as bipolar makes a lot of sense. You're up, then you're down. That sounds pretty bipolar-y. But, sweet summer child, there is a whole universe of endocrinology to explore. And while bipolar is marked by rapid mood swings, the clincher with PMDD is it happens within the window of time within the monthly cycle, 4 weeks. And it's less mood swingy and more like a mood seesaw. When you're up, you're solidly up, just up. You're functioning great. And when you're down, you're solidly down. Great at functioning bad. And now more and more women are realizing they actually have PMDD because people aren't afraid to talk about periods now. And did you know, and I know that you do know this, there was a time when it was considered controversial to even say the word period on TV, like when we used to watch TV. And we used to have to use blue liquid to symbolize period blood on ads for pads. Actually, I'm still waiting for a period product company to use red liquid to accurately portray menstruation. And I know this is going to sound mega boomer of me, but there's violence on the TV, people. This is a period from a vagina that we make love to make babies, who grow up to be people, who drive the economy, who buy things, to impress their dates, who they make love to, who make babies, etc., etc. You get it. Anyway, I'm getting heated here. But in a way, I get why people didn't discuss women's hormone stuff in the mainstream before. Like, go with me. I mean, women weren't even allowed to wear pants in an office until the late 80s. So I actually don't blame society for being like, hey, you know what? Let's just brush over this shifty hormonal mood stuff because we don't need any more people complaining about us in the workplace. We only just got pants, people. But thankfully, now we're here. Life is good. Well, it's not good. It's life, though. And we talk about this stuff now because it impacts every single person on the planet, whether you bleed out of your vagina or not. Which is where I get to the point of this episode. PMDD and relationships, whether they're friendships or romantic, it can affect it. Because the feelings when the luteal phase hits feel very, very real. I'm just scrolling through the PMDD thread on Reddit right now. And there's post after post after post of people saying things like, I don't feel like I deserve friendships, or I can't focus on more than one task without getting overwhelmed, and now my husband hates me, or the insomnia is killing me, or I'm hyperfixating on every negative thing in my life right now, or I'm feeling so self-critical that I'm doubting every decision I made during my follicular phase. And each post ends with some form of, I know I'll be back to myself once my period comes, but this is hell. I'll be honest, I see parts of myself in all of those posts in varying degrees. But information is power, people, which is why I have turned to a bona fide expert for this episode, Jess from Her Mood Mentor on Instagram. I think I first discovered her from my IG search page. Thank you, algorithm. She's more than just an IG support page. Jess is like a PMDD support doula. She's an educator. She's on a mission to educate and support people to be softer with themselves and provide the tools to not want to kill yourself every single month. And frankly, I feel like she pulls up the slack where a lot of medical professionals have failed us because the fucking patriarchy and women's issues not being prioritized, blah, blah, blah. Give me a glass of wine one day and I'll go into it with you. There's a lot to cover in this chat, but we stay pretty close to the topic of relationships. So let's get into it. Jess, hi. Firstly, thank you so much. I was so grateful when I first landed by accident or potentially by the algorithm onto your account. on Instagram at Her Mood Mentor. Your content is so clean, it's easy to understand, and it's delivered with such empathy.
Thank you so much for having me here. I've been catching up on recent episodes and I just love the vulnerability that's being shared here. And also thank you for the kind words around the Her Mood Mentor account. So much energy goes into that, so I'm happy that it is proving to be helpful to you, and I'm so happy to have you as part of the community.
Now, as a PMDD expert, I know that you didn't just stumble upon this topic just for fun. Are you able to share a little bit about your own PMDD journey and what inspired you to start Her Mood Mentor?
Sheesh, the question around starting the account. It's more of a saga, the story, but I'll keep it short. The business, Her Mood Mentor, that I started to help people learn how to reduce and manage symptoms really came from my own journey. It was brutal. It was almost 2 decades long. It was incredibly traumatic and painful living with a reproductive mood disorder, undiagnosed, misdiagnosed, unmanaged. And at a crossroads, I really had to make a choice of, is this going to kill me? Like, I cannot continue living this way, or am I going to change what I'm doing and take a completely different approach? And when I did make that choice at that crossroads, I finally started seeing symptom relief for the first time in 17 years of wanting to die every month before I menstruated. And I really wanted to share what I was learning and also just share some positivity around the experience of PMDD because it is extremely negative. There's a lack of information just in general, a lack of support in general. And I wanted to be a voice of hope because it was literally the only thing that got me through was changing my perspective and my mindset around the symptoms and really shifting out of some of that negativity. So the account is there to help others hopefully do the same in their own unique ways.
Now, there's so much to cover around this topic, but the reason I've got you on today is to discuss the impact that PMDD can have on couples, hetero or same sex, because a common theme amongst people who suffer from PMDD, as you know, is that when they enter their luteal phase, they just want to leave their partners and move to a cabin in the woods and basically hide. And I'm not being hyperbolic. Like, this is a very common thread that is always posted in the PMDD forum on Reddit and in other support communities. So why do you think that is such a common desire for people when they enter that phase?
Ooh, this is such a juicy question, and I'd like to answer in 2 parts because what you first said about the impact of PMDD on relationships, both same-sex and hetero couples, and also even friendships, is huge and one of the biggest challenges that I see and one of the biggest reasons why people come to work with me. You know, we can tolerate and withstand a lot of suffering within ourselves, but when that suffering starts to impact our relationships and the people that we love most, that's where a lot of us start to draw the line and say, hey, something's got to give. While I can handle severe psychological symptoms, I can't handle the way that those symptoms are hurting the people around me that I love. So I just want to reflect if this is resonating with any of your listeners, Megan, that they're not alone. The menstrual cycle massively impacts our mental health, and our mental health has implications in every aspect of our lives, every single aspect. Our menstrual cycle impacts our mental health. Our mental health impacts our financial habits, impacts our work performance, impacts how we're able to communicate, impacts everything. So it's really a big topic here, and it really has implications for everyone in the world, in the community, because so many of us have menstrual cycles, and this conversation around how much it impacts our mental health is just not had. And so we're not really able to zoom out and see, wow, what are these symptoms doing to our communities as a whole?
100%. So swept under the rug. Completely agree.
That's a whole tangent there that we can explore another time, because what a frontier that is. But another factor that you're pointing out between couples, specifically hetero versus same sex. So in a same sex couple, the menstrual cycle is a shared experience, and there can be more understanding, more personal experience from the partner around symptoms that they've maybe experienced. So a lot of my clients in a same-sex couple where both are menstruating, the navigation through the symptoms, I'm not going to say it's easier, but it's a different dynamic. In a hetero couple, there isn't that shared personal experience of menstruation. So there's a lot of mystery. There's no education for males around the menstrual cycle. Definitely no education around how that might impact the partner's mental health. So there's just this shroud of mystery and misunderstanding. And when that's happening, it can lead to so many more communication conflicts, so much more dissonance within the relationship because of that lack of understanding. And a lot of times the PMDD person in the relationship is already struggling with communication because of how severe the symptoms can be. So this can really just become a mess. Some really negative patterns can start to repeat and play out, and it can become very toxic very quickly, unfortunately. And that's another rabbit hole that we could spend this entire episode discussing.
Yeah, I know. You actually can't blame women for wanting to go to a cabin because it's just too much. It's too big.
Such an interesting question, and again, such a shared experience for people living with severe premenstrual symptoms or PMDD is that wanting to leave their partners each cycle, move into the cabin in the woods, and hide. And there are three primary points that I want to point out around why this happens from a biological and physiological standpoint, because it's so interesting, and through understanding our bodies, we can bring more compassion to the experience rather than just berating ourselves with shame and guilt around wanting to leave and run away to that cabin in the woods. So the first point I want to make, and this kind of ties into neurobiology really, but estrogen and serotonin are linked. Estrogen, which is high in that pre-ovulatory phase, specifically right around ovulation, this is a hormone that is a natural mood stabilizer. It's kind of like a natural antidepressant. So we feel really good when estrogen is high because estrogen is linked to serotonin. When estrogen is high, serotonin is high, and we're feeling great during that period. But after ovulation, estrogen drops pretty significantly and pretty rapidly. And because of that, serotonin drops. And this can lead to a cascade of negative mood symptoms that we see in PMDD. And so PMDD is not a hormone imbalance. It is a sensitivity to the fluctuation of hormones, the natural fluctuation of hormones that happen throughout the menstrual cycle. And when estrogen is fluctuating and serotonin is fluctuating, our brains, those of us who are experiencing PMDD symptoms, are very sensitive to that. And so that is one of the areas and one of the physiological changes that are occurring in our reproductive system that result in many negative mood symptoms, including that kind of wanting to run away, wanting to escape, wanting to leave our partners.
I just want to say I'm so glad that you're getting into explaining the scientific stuff behind it for people, because I just don't have that knowledge. So thank you for that.
The second point that I want to make, and serotonin does play into this point around why those tendencies occur or why they can occur, there's more reasons than this, but is the stress response system. So your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is responsible for triggering a fight or flight response in your sympathetic nervous system. And when serotonin is low, that impacts the HPA axis. So we're more susceptible for various reasons, including progesterone rising being one of them, after ovulation to a stress response, and that's literally fight or flight, wanting to pack our bags and run, isolate, and hide. That is a stress response type of behavior that can be linked to the cycle. This is so fascinating to me because of the link between trauma and PMDD. So if you have a history of trauma, you're 6.7 times more likely to experience severe premenstrual symptoms, aka PMDD. And so this is telling us a lot about our nervous systems and how our nervous systems are really linked with our reproductive system. Obviously, think about a wartime situation. Would your body want to be reproducing and having a child during a wartime? No. There are built-in biological parts of our system as a whole to shut down those hormones. Stress hormones impact sex hormones is what I'm getting at. And, stress really impacts how your hormones are balanced. So that biological mechanism in the HPA axis will wreak havoc on hormone balance. Now, I said PMDD isn't a hormone imbalance, and it's not, but that doesn't mean we can't be experiencing hormone imbalance and a sensitivity to the hormone fluctuations. There's much nuance to dive into around these topics, but how interesting is that you have these built-in mechanisms to protect you during a stressful situation, but also that you're a little bit more prone to stress during the luteal phase. And that leads me into the third point of why we want to run away and hide in the woods and leave our partners. And this might even just be the most fascinating one. So this third point is all about progesterone. So this is the progestation hormone that is rising and peaking during the luteal or premenstrual phase of the cycle. There are 4 phases of the menstrual cycle. This is the last phase, and this is when we experience premenstrual symptoms. So progesterone is the dominant hormone during this time, and there are certain qualities to progesterone that really set it apart from estrogen. So, and I wanted to spend a little bit more time on this because this is going to be really helpful for many of the male listeners out there who never got that sex ed that they needed to get around the female body, and is going to help them understand their partner's changes and fluctuations throughout the cycle in a way that can help the male partner not be as, not take things as personally. So in those 4 phases of the menstrual cycle, we start out with the menstrual phase. The hormones are the lowest in that phase, and that is when menstruation is occurring. Then you move into the follicular phase, which is the second phase of the menstrual cycle, and that's when hormones are starting to build up. We have LH, we have FSH during this time, and we have estrogen. Now, and also testosterone. This is when we are kind of getting our spunk back and our sex drive is starting to rise, because this is the only phase of the cycle where we are actually fertile and can conceive. So our biology wants to, get jiggy with it, for lack of a better word, during this phase. But things rapidly change as soon as ovulation ends, and ovulation technically is a 24-hour event at most, but the hormones are building and we can conceive for a total of 6 days each cycle. But okay, so estrogen, we ovulate, estrogen peaks, and estrogen starts to fall. As progesterone is rising, our biology takes a 180 and, goes from, hey, I want to be out, I want to be social, I want to be rubbing shoulders with people, because that will potentially lead to conception. Now, this is happening most likely unconsciously pretty much all of the time, because our biology has a agenda regardless of what we're wanting to do when it comes to reproduction. And then in the second half of the cycle, the luteal phase, after estrogen peaks, this is when your body doesn't know if it conceived or not yet. So instead of being out there, potentially working towards conception, we are guarding. We don't know if our body doesn't know if it has succeeded in conceiving, and it is in a protective mode. And that is to avoid pathogens because it wants to protect that embryo, make sure that implantation happens safely and that there are no problems. So we go from being really into our partners, really touchy, really feely, really sexual and sensual to the opposite very quickly.
Oh my God, wow. It's like your body's hidden agenda. And meanwhile, you're living life trying to work and function, and your body's like got this whole other storyline going.
It isn't necessarily a fun experience for us, but it is a way that our bodies are protecting us in the ways that it knows how. So a lot is going on here, but this is another reason on a biological, physiological level why we have that shift with our partners. It's not a conscious thing. It literally is hormonal and biological. And then for those of us experiencing PMDD, we're sensitive to that change. So, progesterone should be a really calming and relaxing hormone, but what's happening in the brain for people who are experiencing PMDD is that progesterone is actually agitating and irritating us rather than calming us down and relaxing us, which can feel really unfair, but understanding what's happening is the first step to changing it. So that's a really pivotal piece as we're looking at some of the ways that behavior is linked to these hormonal changes throughout the cycle.
Okay, that was amazing. So much detail and depth. I love it. Okay, next question. One thing I used to always say with my sister was that PMDD is kind of like my fucked up superpower. And when I'm in my follicular phase, it's like my rose-colored glasses are on and I can patch over issues easily. And then when I enter the luteal phase, it's like a veil is removed and I can identify issues faster because I'm not able to gloss over things. So I'm kind of like a laser beam on stuff. So my question is, how does a person with PMDD know which side of her cycle is the real her?
This is such a fun question as well, Megan. The rose-colored glasses. I mean, if you have experienced hormone imbalance or PMDD specifically, I mean, you just hear that question and that metaphor and you know it in your bones. And anybody who's experiencing a menstrual cycle can relate to some degree of this, right? Everything is just kind of elevated in PMDD. So that estrogen really is the rose-colored glasses. Serotonin is high. We can just kind of gloss over things. We're more resilient. And then when estrogen is gone and the serotonin is dropping, we really don't have that lens available to us anymore. We can see problems very clearly. We can no longer gloss over the things that aren't bothering us. And this duality of the PMDD experience, because it's so high and so low, is why PMDD is most commonly misdiagnosed as bipolar disorder, because it's drastic changes. And, there's nuance here as well. But I think it's important to challenge around this belief around two versions of ourselves are that emotion isn't a pathology, right? Like having strong emotion is necessary. We don't want to work to reduce and manage symptoms and alleviate you of strong emotion, because strong emotion is your body communicating to us that something is wrong and something needs to change, and you need that nervous system activation available. So the first thing I want to do is just validate that this is a shared experience in the PMDD community, that so many people feel this confusion between which version of them is real. And when the symptoms are unmanaged or you're living undiagnosed, there's a lot of confusion around this, and shame and guilt and negativity around the differences between those two sides. But I first just really want to drive home that there are no bad emotions or wrong emotions or real or not real emotions. Like, we have a entire spectrum of emotion within us, and they're all part of who we are. But working to parse that out a little bit and just find some balance there can really help as you're kind of regaining a sense of self in the midst of a mood disorder. And I really like how you're framing it as a superpower, because in some ways it is, right? If something continues to bother you over and over again, it's coming up luteal phase after luteal phase, it's something that matters to you. And thank goodness the estrogen isn't there to just help you gloss over it some more, because a boundary is being surpassed. So working on mindset when it comes to PMDD, working on education around hormones and mental health, building self-awareness, helping to really determine a sense of identity outside of the PMDD chaos can really, really be helpful as you're kind of just integrating your experience into who you are, rather than trying to pigeonhole yourself into that's me and this isn't me, and rejecting part of who you are, even if that version of who you are isn't a great experience and we want to reject it because it's super negative.
Oh, thank you for validating. You touched a little bit on it, but one of the most frustrating things about PMDD is that it is often confused with bipolar disorder. I guess because a lot of doctors aren't informed about the impact the hormones can have on mood. Can you share some of the ways to determine the difference between these conditions?
Yes, I'm so happy that you're digging into this a little bit more, because it's so common. It is the most misdiagnosed diagnosis of PMDD, and I had a personal experience with this where I was misdiagnosed and treated medically with very strong drugs for bipolar disorder, and I didn't have bipolar disorder, and those medications wrecked my life in ways that we won't go into here. But so many of us are experiencing this struggle around, is it bipolar disorder, is it PMDD? And there's one just very cut and dry, clear way to distinguish if it's bipolar or if it's PMDD, and that is the time of presentation of symptoms. So PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, only occurs premenstrually. Now, symptoms for some of us sometimes can bleed into the menstrual cycle for 1 to 3 days, but generally we find relief immediately upon menstruation. Bipolar disorder can show up at any point. So the really definitive way to determine, which can still take time, what's what, is to do what I call symptom mapping. And I have a free download for your listeners, for you. If you head over to my IG, you can access this. It's a different way of collecting data around your cycle than cycle tracking. So cycle tracking, we're looking at, when did we start bleeding? How long did we bleed? Maybe how heavy our bleed was, maybe some symptoms, but it's not a real visual representation of symptoms. And when we're dealing with PMDD or potentially bipolar and parsing them out, it is really, really, really helpful to have a clear, detailed data collection of symptom presentation. So doing that for 2, 3, 4 months, you should start to recognize if there's a pattern to the mood-related symptoms. And if they're falling in that luteal phase window around day 14 to day 1, 2 of the cycle over and over and over, that's PMDD. If they're coming up all over the place, that's where we want to do some additional testing to rule out other underlying conditions that could be leading to those symptoms, and then maybe, dive in with our physician to really evaluate bipolar disorder. But I will also say the lab testing is a key component, in my opinion, to even diagnosing psychological disorders, because there are many physiological things, as we have talked about, that can lead to mental health symptoms. And for some reason, there's just a disconnect between regular medicine and mental health. And so that's something to consider as well.
Okay, let's give the people some hope now. So personally, Sometimes I am afraid to move back in with someone because living on my own, for instance, I value my space to just die under the doona for a few days when PMDD gets bad. My ex, understandably, took this behavior very personally, which is fair enough. He didn't understand it, and I don't think I even understood it before I was diagnosed. So this is a bit of a three-pronged question. What are some ways to manage the symptoms of PMDD from the sufferer's side? And what are some ways the partner can help the sufferer manage the symptoms? And what can a couple do collectively to work together when luteal hits?
This is such a good question, and I love how you phrased it already in symptom management. So often we just want to reduce our symptoms, right? We feel terrible and we're just really focused on reducing them. But a large part of living with PMDD is also managing the symptoms in addition to trying to reduce them. So with my students and clients, we approach this from 7 core areas of hormone health when it comes to symptom reduction and management. And this is relevant to your partner because how you're managing your symptoms is going to impact how you're showing up in the relationship. So I'm only going to talk about 4 here, and those are 4 of the most, biologically important core areas when it comes to symptom management and reduction. And don't get overwhelmed by the fact that I'm talking about 4 things here. What I really want you to take away from this is just to focus on what you can control, right? Because PMDD feels just like a complete lack of control. And as we're looking to manage symptoms, really shifting our perspective and shifting our awareness towards just one thing that's important, that can help, that is evidence-based, rather than trying to tackle 7 core areas or 7 different things at once. Really just picking one out of this list and getting some education and taking some targeted action around one of these core areas. So the 4 areas are nutrition, movement, resilience, and that really comes down to stress management, and sleep. These 4 areas are non-negotiable when we're talking about hormone health, when we're talking about PMDD, and when we're talking about symptom management. And these are also core areas that are basic that your partner also does in life, right? So they can support you. You can work together in choosing one of these core areas and working on some targeted action that is going to specifically support your symptoms and how you're managing them and helping you manage them better and feel better, while considering and maybe getting direct support from your partner. And then for the second question, how can our partners help us manage our PMDD symptoms more specifically? So one of the most important factors to this question is them understanding the cycle phases and understanding that as being in relationship with a female body, a cyclical body, that we are going to be different throughout different phases of the cycle, whether or not we have PMDD. And that's a deep, maybe paradigm shift for the male, especially a male living in high masculine energy, because they don't experience those hormonal, physiological, and biological changes. So it's hard for them to understand and relate to the reality of female biology. Getting an understanding and some education around what are those 4 phases, what does that mean as far as how my partner might be behaving or feeling, is a really good first step. And then also some communication between the PMDD partner and their significant other around where they specifically are each cycle. So the partner supporting the PMDD person knowing, oh, hey, this is a luteal phase week. She's going to have lower energy. She's going to maybe be more easily overwhelmed. So I might cook dinner a couple extra times this week, or I might wait to bring up this conversation that's challenging that we need to have until after this phase ends.
Yeah, I definitely hold off big conversations as much as I can until after my period. Good call.
And then for the third question, something that partners can do together, one of the big factors here that can make or break a relationship when PMDD is a factor is communication. Again, So working on learning communication styles, improving communication styles, and I do have a resource for this. If anyone is looking for support around this, I have a workbook called the PMDD Partner Workbook, and it's something that you work through with your partner that really helps identify some patterns, helps identify some ways that the symptoms impact them, some ways that the symptoms impact you, what your specific symptom pattern is. It helps you together get really clear on some of those just repetitive things you're dealing with each month so that you can develop strategies around navigating them together as a couple.
Actually, that dovetails nicely into my final question, because yours is actually the first PMDD account that actually has tools and courses and even a support call option for when someone just needs to talk it out. I might even use that one day. What course or program would you recommend to someone who's in partnership and just wants to navigate things better? Do you have something that people can do?
So currently I do have that partner workbook. That's a great place to start. I have a online self-paced course that is for people experiencing PMDD, but there's an entire relationship module in there that you could do with your partner. And I'm getting ready to build out more resources specifically for partners, including partner support groups and a mini course series for partners because, like I said, there's just so little out there. So that's in the works. Stay tuned.
Jess, that was incredible. So in depth and so valuable and super validating for people who have it and for partners who may have been struggling with how to cope with people who have PMDD. So you're amazing. Thank you. And yeah, maybe I'll give you a call on the support line soon. Hopefully not, though.
Thank you so much for having me, Megan. It's been so fun chatting with you about PMDD and the impact on relationships. And thanks for using your podcast to raise awareness about such a serious and debilitating mental health disorder that really needs to be talked about more.
And that's it, guys. Emphasis on the guys. I hope that this was valuable to only the men that were listening. But no, let's be real. I hope that everyone got something out of it. And as always, if you want to leave a comment on anything that we've discussed today, you can leave me a voicemail at selfcare-ish.com.au. And I will see you next week.